German tank crews had a nickname for the American M4 Sherman long before they ever faced one in battle. They called it Tommy Cooker, Ronson, and the Burning Bush. The message was clear. To them, the Sherman was a weak, thin-skinned machine that burst into flames when hit. And in 1942 and early 1943, it was easy to see why the jokes spread so quickly. The Sherman arrived in North Africa as a fast, reliable, mass-produced medium tank, but not a match for the long-barreled Panzer IV, and certainly not for the Tiger Marschall. German gunners could punch through its armor before the Sherman crews even got into effective range. But the Germans didn't yet know something important. The Sherman was not a single machine. It was a platform, one that America could modify, adapt, and evolve faster than the German industry could react. And one variant of the Sherman would soon do something no Tiger, no Panther, and no bunker could endure. It would bring fire, controlled, directed, unstoppable fire, into the very places the German army believed were invulnerable. This is the story of how German tankers laughed at the Sherman, and how that laughter stopped when the Americans rolled out a weapon designed not to win tank duels, but to break the strongest fortifications on the European battlefield. Chapter 1. Why the Sherman was mocked when U.S. armored units entered the war. The Sherman was built around American doctrine. Tanks were not meant to fight tanks. Shermans were meant to support infantry, exploit breakthroughs, and maneuver around enemy armor, while dedicated tank destroyers handled the heavy fighting. But war rarely respects doctrine. In Tunisia, Sicily, and Italy, Sherman crews found themselves facing Tigers, Panthers, and long-barreled Panzer IVs in terrain that favored the defender. German gun crews knew exactly where Allied armor would appear. Long-range shots from 75mm and 88mm cannons tore through Shermans with frightening precision. In many after-action reports, American tankers wrote the same line. "We saw the flash before we heard the sound." German propaganda quickly seized on the Sherman's weaknesses. Photos of burning American tanks circulated, reinforcing the idea that the M4 was fragile and obsolete. But what these photos did not show was the other side of the story. Shermans were far more reliable than German tanks. They were easier to repair in the field. They were built in enormous numbers. They could be modified faster than German industry could respond. And in Italy, a place of hills, stone buildings, mountain passes, and concrete bunkers, American commanders realized something crucial. The biggest threat to Allied infantry was not German armor. It was fortified positions. Machine gun nests, pillboxes, and tunnel systems slowed every advance. Artillery could neutralize them, but not destroy them. Infantry flamethrowers worked, but getting close enough meant nearly suicidal exposure. What the Allies needed was a weapon that combined the mobility of a tank, the armor protection of steel, and the fearsome psychological effect of fire. The idea was not new. The British had tried flame tanks in North Africa. The Marines were experimenting in the Pacific. But the U.S. Army in Europe needed something stronger, something with range, reliability, and accuracy, something that could make even hardened German veterans abandon positions they would otherwise defend to the death. Chapter 2. The idea that changed everything. The first prototypes appeared quietly, without fanfare. Engineers replaced the Sherman's hull machine gun with a flamethrower projector. The initial range was short, barely 40 meters, but even that changed the battlefield. During the fighting in Italy in late 1943, commanders reported an astonishing pattern. Whenever a Sherman fitted with a flamethrower approached a bunker, the German defenders frequently surrendered without a fight. Not because the tank was more lethal than a cannon, but because the threat of fire was something even elite troops could not ignore. The psychological impact was immediate. The same soldiers who joked about Shermans being easy to burn were now retreating from Shermans that could burn them. Still, the early flamethrowers had major limitations. They required multiple crewmen to operate, the pressure systems were unreliable, and the flame stream wandered in crosswind. Then came the breakthrough. American engineers developed a high-pressure system capable of projecting a concentrated fire stream over 100 meters, with devastating accuracy. The fuel mixture was thicker, hotter, and clung to surfaces. This new weapon turned the Sherman into something fundamentally different: a bunker buster on tracks, a fortress breaker, a tank that could do what artillery could not.
Chapter 3. From Italy to the final push into Germany by 1944 as the Allies advanced northward. Flamethrower Shermans became more common. Infantry units began requesting them before every major assault. Reports describe entire defensive lines collapsing the moment a single flame tank appeared. German soldiers wrote in their diaries, "We could fight tanks, we could fight guns, but fire no man can fight fire." Veterans of the Eastern Front, men who had survived Kursk and Stalingrad, admitted that flame tanks were one of the few weapons that caused panic even among experienced troops, and as the Allies approached the Siegfried Line in late 1944, a network of Dragon's Teeth bunkers, anti-tank guns, and concrete fortresses, the demand for flamethrower Shermans reached its peak. The Siegfried Line was designed to repel any conventional assault, but it was not designed for this, not for a tank that could send a jet of fire through gun ports, ventilation shafts, cracks in concrete, and wooden doors. Not for a weapon that bypassed ricochet angles, armor thickness, and even steel shutters. For the first time since the start of the war, the Germans were on the receiving end of a fire weapon more terrifying than anything they had built. This is where the laughter ended. This is where the Sherman earned a new reputation, not as a fragile medium tank, but as an engine of destruction designed to break the hardest defensive lines in Europe. Chapter 4. The battlefield that made flamethrower tanks essential. As the Allied armies pushed from France into Belgium and toward the German frontier in late 1944, they encountered a kind of defensive warfare that no Sherman gun, no artillery shell, and no infantry assault could easily break. The German army had constructed a continent-spanning defensive barrier, the Siegfried Line, known in Germany as the West Wall. Stretching over 630 kilometers, this network contained more than 18,000 bunkers, pillboxes of reinforced concrete underground tunnels, and ammunition rooms, anti-tank obstacles, Dragon's Teeth, interlocking machine gun nests. Hidden artillery positions. The Allies soon discovered a grim truth. Conventional tank warfare was almost useless against a fortress system. A Panther or Tiger could duel with Shermans in open terrain, but the Siegfried Line did not rely on tanks. It relied on positions designed to survive anything except fire. A 75mm shell could shatter the exterior of a bunker but rarely destroyed the firing ports. A 105mm howitzer could shake defenders but rarely neutralized them. An infantry flamethrower could finish the job, but only if the operator survived long enough to reach the wall. Flamethrower Shermans changed this equation overnight. Their arrival on the Siegfried Line was not just tactical. It was psychological. American infantrymen called them lifesavers. German defenders began calling them something else entirely. Fortified, the Fire Devils. Chapter 5. How the new flamethrower Sherman worked. The definitive model of the European flamethrower Sherman was known as the POSEW-SH1, a complicated designation, but the basics were simple. It kept its 75mm cannon fully functional. It replaced the Hull machine gun with a high-pressure flame projector. It carried enough thickened fuel for around 60 bursts of flame. It could project fire up to 120 meters, 3 times farther than earlier models. Inside the tank were to pressurized nitrogen bottles to drive the fuel-armored piping running through the hull, a mixture of gasoline and napalm-like gelling agents, valves designed to prevent accidental ignition. The system was so reliable that crews trusted it even under direct enemy fire. And unlike artillery or small arms, fire ignored angles, ricochets, cover, and armor thickness. A German bunker designed to survive a Tiger tank could not survive a 120-meter jet of burning fuel. This was the first time in the European theater that mechanized flame had been deployed on a mass scale, and when the first fully equipped flame Sherman battalions reached the front, The nature of siege warfare changed instantly. Chapter 6: The day flamethrower Shermans broke open the Siegfried Line. Reports from the U.S. First Army describe one of the earliest decisive moments. Case study: the bunker on Hill 287 on a cold gray morning outside Aachen. Infantry units from the 26th Infantry Regiment were pinned down by a concrete bunker that dominated the valley. Machine gun fire swept the hillside. Mortars fired endlessly from the rear chamber of the fortification. Artillery observers inside the bunker spotted every movement. For hours, nothing worked. Anti-tank rounds chipped the concrete but did not penetrate. Satchel charges thrown by engineers failed to reach the firing port. Multiple infantry flamethrower teams were cut down before getting close. It was the classic German strongpoint: immovable, disciplined, deadly. Then a single Sherman equipped with the Polkus H1 flamethrower rolled up the slope, under covering smoke. German watchers inside the bunker reported no fear at first. To them, it was just another Sherman. Thin armor, short gun, harmless. But as the tank halted 80 meters from the bunker and a narrow metal projector extended forward, the mood inside changed instantly. The flame burst produced a roaring sound like a jet engine. A solid stream of liquid fire slammed into the firing port, then splashed across the upper wall, dripping into ventilation slits and observation holes. The result was catastrophic. German survivors later wrote, "The fire came inside as if carried by the wind. The air turned to smoke, the walls to heat. We could not breathe. We could not see." Within 60 seconds, the entire garrison surrendered, emerging coughing, burned, choking on fumes. American infantry advanced without losing a single man. It was the first of dozens of similar engagements. What artillery could not destroy, what riflemen could not capture, a single flame Sherman could neutralize in moments. This was the moment officers realized. Flamethrower Shermans weren't support vehicles. They were breakthrough weapons. Chapter 7: The fear that spread through the German army. Captured letters, diaries, and interrogation transcripts began revealing a pattern. German soldiers feared flame tanks more than any allied weapon except heavy bombers. One co from the 116th Panzer Division wrote, "A tank battle is honorable. You can maneuver, you can retreat, you can fight, but the flame tank gives no chance. It kills the air and the will." Another report from the Volksgrenadier divisions defending the Eifel region stated, "When the flame tank approaches, men begin to abandon their posts. They fear suffocation more than bullets." This psychological collapse had massive tactical consequences. Bunkers were abandoned early, defensive lines broke faster, morale deteriorated, retreats became chaotic. German commanders complained that once flame tanks appeared, discipline vanished. Even Waffen-SS units, known for fanatical resistance, requested additional anti-tank guns specifically to stop flamethrower Shermans, not regular Shermans. The fear was not irrational. A single burst could ignite ammunition, fill tunnels with smoke, disable ventilation, force defenders to flee, neutralize an entire bunker system within seconds. No Panther or Tiger could offer the same effect. Chapter 8: Sherman flame tanks in urban combat. As the Allies entered German towns, Stolberg, Eschweiler, Rosellen, and eventually Cologne, street fighting became brutal. German troops hid in cellars, basements, sewer openings, reinforced doors, upper floor machine gun positions. Regular tanks were nearly useless in these confined areas, but flame Shermans were devastating. A typical urban engagement: infantry would identify a building believed to contain a machine gun nest. A Sherman would pull up, aim the projector at a window or door, and deliver a burst lasting to seconds. Inside, oxygen disappeared as flaming fuel consumed the air. Whether defenders survived or not, they always retreated. American after-action reports repeatedly say, flame tanks shortened house clearing operations by 90%. One battalion commander put it bluntly, "Without flame Shermans, every German basement would have cost us a platoon." Chapter 9: The irony. Germans had laughed at Shermans for years. German tank crews had mocked the Sherman as weak, undergunned, and prone to fire. Now the roles reversed. The Sherman was the one bringing fire, and for once the German army had no countermeasure. Thick concrete didn't help underground bunkers, didn't help armor, didn't help discipline, didn't help. This was the moment historians describe as the reversal. The Sherman, once the subject of jokes, became a symbol of unstoppable Allied mobility and firepower. It did not matter that some German tanks were technically superior. What mattered was that the Sherman could be built in variants. That solved the battlefield's real problems. The flamethrower Sherman did not win tank duels. It won battles. Chapter 10. The Forest That Ate Armies. Hürtgen. By late 1944, the Allies had liberated France, crossed Belgium, and now stood before a dark, forbidding wall of trees, the Hürtgen Forest. It was unlike anything they had fought in before. Dense pine trees blocked sunlight, ravines channeled movement, mud swallowed vehicles. Mines littered every trail, German machine gun nests hid behind fallen logs, mortars landed. Without warning, invisible under the canopy, the battle quickly turned into one of the longest and most miserable campaigns fought by American forces in Europe. Entire regiments vanished into the woods, suffering heavy casualties for almost no territorial gain. German defenders were dug into bunkers carved into hillsides. Some positions had steel doors, reinforced chimneys, and fire ports arranged to cover every approach. Infantry flamethrower teams rarely made it across the open forest floor. They were cut down before reaching their targets. Again, American commanders turned to flamethrower Shermans. But unlike the battles near Aachen, the terrain of the Hürtgen Forest posed new challenges. The trees were so close together that tanks had trouble maneuvering. Mud immobilized treads. Hidden mines could rip off a Sherman's track, leaving it helpless. Still, when the terrain allowed it, flame tanks were decisive. Case study: the engagement at Wassenach Ridge. A platoon of Sherman flame tanks was ordered to support infantry, trying to clear a cluster of German bunkers. The approach ran through a narrow logging trail barely wider than a tank, to Sherman's bogged down. One hit a mine. Only one made it to the ridge. The lone tank crawled forward under machine gun fire that clanged against its armor. An engineer unit set smoke grenades along the path to screen the advance. The wind kept blowing the smoke away. Reaching the bunker complex, the Sherman delivered a burst of flame over the top of the hill. The fire rolled downward into trench lines, igniting ammunition and forcing defenders out. German soldiers fled, running through the trees, some throwing down their weapons, others blinded by smoke. Infantry followed and captured the ridge. A single flame tank had succeeded where days of artillery and rifle attacks had failed. Yet the operation illustrated the limits of firepower. The forest was too restrictive. After that mission, commanders concluded, flame tanks break strong points, but flame tanks alone cannot break the Hürtgen. Chapter 11. The Ardennes. Fire in the snow. On December 16, 1944, the German army launched its final major offensive in the west, the Battle of the Bulge. Ardennes weather turned the battlefield into a frozen labyrinth. Snow-covered bunkers, trenches, anti-tank ditches, and machine gun nests. Visibility dropped to meters. American units were scattered, undermanned, and surprised. At first, flamethrower Shermans seemed irrelevant. The offensive was a tank battle, not a siege. But as the front stabilized and U.S. forces pushed to recapture lost villages, fire tanks again proved indispensable, burning out the frozen strongpoints in the village of Fortminy. German troops fortified stone houses with internal barricades, loopholes, and sniper nests. American riflemen advancing through the snow were repeatedly pinned down. A flamethrower Sherman from the 740th Tank Battalion rolled into the main street, its tracks crunching frozen rubble. Machine gun fire ricocheted off its glacis plate. The commander identified a house with 3 firing ports, a classic strong point. The tank fired a 2-second burst. Flame shot through the lower windows, followed by pressure wave that blew smoke out of the attic slots. German soldiers sprinted out the back door. A second burst ignited the staircase, forcing the rest to surrender. Within minutes, the American advance continued. The scene repeated itself across the Ardennes. Small, fortified houses, perfect German defensive positions, turned vulnerable in seconds. The combination of stone walls, enclosed rooms, low winter ventilation made flame even more effective than in France or Belgium. Chapter 12. When even the Tigers feared the Sherman, German tank crews had long considered the Sherman inferior. In open duels, this was often true. Tiger and Panther tanks had superior armor and guns, but flamethrower Shermans introduced a fear those heavy tanks were never designed to counter. A Tiger's frontal armor could stop almost anything, but it could not stop flame force down. Engine grilles, turret ring gaps, periscope wells, ventilation ports. American tank destroyer reports describe several encounters where Tigers or Panthers abandoned positions, simply because flame tanks approached. Enemy armor withdrew without firing. They feared flame more than penetration. This was new psychological territory. Crews who had survived artillery barrages and anti-tank guns suddenly faced a weapon that filled their compartment with smoke, threatened fuel ignition, overcame armor. Without penetration, a Tiger I commander captured near Monschau admitted, "We were not trained to fight against fire. We were trained to fight tanks." Chapter 13. The Final Offensives. The Rhineland in early 1945. The Allies launched operations to breach the last major German defensive zones west of the Rhine. Rohr River, Remagen, Cologne, Wesel. German fortifications became even more brutal. Reinforced basements, concrete roadblocks, anti-tank obstacles in narrow town streets. Cellar-to-cellar tunnel systems, sniper positions in church towers. Flame tanks again proved critical. The Battle of Cologne. Urban firepower as the 3rd Armored Division pushed into Cologne. It encountered continuous small pockets of determined defenders. A flamethrower Sherman, operating behind standard gun tanks, neutralized threats by delivering bursts into basement windows and ventilation grates. After-action summaries from the division conclude, flame tanks reduced our casualties in Cologne by at least 1/3. That number is remarkable given the scale of the fighting. Chapter 14. How flame tanks shortened the war. Historians now estimate that flamethrower Shermans collapsed strong points in hours instead of days. Reduced infantry casualties dramatically demoralized defenders, saved divisions from months of additional attrition in siege-like environments. Aachen, Metz. The Siegfried Line. They were often the only weapon capable of forcing a breakthrough, without catastrophic losses. Had the Allies lacked flame tanks, the Siegfried Line might have required weeks of artillery bombardment, massive infantry assaults, thousands more casualties. When U.S. Army engineer wrote, "Without the flame tank, every bunker would have cost a company, every village a battalion." Chapter 15. The moral and psychological controversy. Flamethrower tanks were effective, terrifyingly effective, but they also sparked ethical debates inside the U.S. Army. Officially, fire was considered a psychological weapon, a bunker-clearing tool, a tactical necessity. Unofficially, many commanders admitted it was inhumane, yet they also understood the alternative: infantry dying by the hundreds for each reinforced bunker. The U.S. Army concluded, "The flamethrower saves more lives than it takes, by ending battles faster and forcing surrenders earlier. Flame tanks may have prevented enormous additional bloodshed." Chapter 16. After the war. Why flame tanks vanished despite their success. The age of flame tanks ended surprisingly quickly. Main reasons: Cold War politics. Fire weapons gained a reputation of being excessively brutal. Armor improved. Heat, rockets, and guided munitions replaced fire for bunker clearing. Urban combat doctrines changed. Infantry used explosives and rifles rather than flame. Risk to crew. Flame tanks carried thousands of liters of flammable fuel. Logistical complexity. Napalm mixing and nitrogen pressurization required specialized support. By the early 1960s, only a few nations still operated mechanized flamethrowers, but their impact in WE remains undeniable. Chapter 17. Legacy. The Sherman flamethrower tank was not a tank killer. It was not glamorous. It did not dominate duels or headlines, but it achieved something more important. It broke the strongest fortifications Germany ever built. It saved thousands of Allied lives. It ended battles that otherwise would have lasted months. By turning the psychological tide and collapsing enemy morale, the Flame Sherman became one of the most important and least talked about innovations of the European theater. The Germans laughed at the Sherman in 1942. They stopped laughing in 1944. Crossing the Rhine. Fire against the last fortress. By March 1945, the German army was no longer a cohesive force but a mosaic of isolated strongpoints. Many Wehrmacht units retreated behind the Rhine River, hoping to delay the inevitable Allied advance. The Rhine crossings were high-risk operations. German defenders fortified Riverbank bunkers, pillboxes disguised as collapsed buildings, tunnels beneath factories, anti-tank barriers welded across bridges, machine gun positions in church towers, overlooking the river for American infantry attempting to secure footholds. Every meter became a struggle. Remagen, the bridge that should not have stood when U.S. forces reached the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen on March 7, 1945. They found the bridge damaged but still standing. The Germans had attempted to demolish it but failed. American troops rushed across under heavy fire. As the bridge had expanded, German troops used basements, drainage tunnels, and railway cutouts to launch counterattacks. Sherman flame tanks were brought forward specifically to eliminate these pockets. Reports describe a German platoon that held out for nearly 8 hours. Inside a reinforced tunnel system, infantry could not approach without taking machine gun fire. One flamethrower Sherman approached the tunnel entrance behind a smoke screen, delivered a 5-second burst, and within minutes the defenders surrendered. Engineers clearing the area later noted that the flame had not killed them. It had simply made further resistance impossible. Chapter 19: The Industrial Ruins of the Ruhr after crossing the Rhine. American forces entered the heart of Germany's industrial region. Cities like Essen, Dortmund, Wuppertal, and Duisburg were filled with steel mills, coal plants, giant warehouses, factory tunnels, scrapyards, and machine hulls. These structures became improvised German fortresses, urban labyrinths, German Volkssturm units, many of them older men or teenagers, fortified industrial blocks with surprising effectiveness. Snipers used conveyor towers as nests. Machine gun crews hid behind stacks of metal beams. Basements connected multiple buildings, allowing defenders to appear behind American positions with little warning. In this maze, flame tanks once again played a decisive role. One after-action report from the 79th Infantry Division notes: conventional tank guns were ineffective inside the factory floors. Flame tanks cleared the corridors quickly and safely. Flame would fill an entire assembly hall, rolling under machinery and into hidden recesses where grenades could not reach. Notably, this phase of the war was among the few where German morale collapsed at the mere sight of flame tanks. Captured soldiers reported, "We did not want to die in fire in the last days of the war. When your flame tanks arrived, we withdrew." Chapter 20: Surrender by flame. A different kind of firepower. By April 1945, as American armies closed the Ruhr pocket, tens of thousands of German soldiers surrendered, but many fortified positions still resisted, especially those commanded by officers under strict orders not to retreat. The Cologne sewers near the outskirts of Cologne. A German company used sewer tunnels to launch night raids against American outposts. Attempts to clear the tunnels with grenades, gas, or small arms failed. A flamethrower Sherman was positioned at a sewer entrance and fired controlled bursts into the tunnel system, not to kill but to drive out the defenders. Heat, smoke, and pressure forced an entire platoon to emerge with hands raised. American commanders later called it a bloodless victory achieved with a weapon everyone feared. Chapter 21: The last German strongpoints in the final week of the war. Isolated German units fortified. Cellars in Dresden and Leipzig, castle-like administrative buildings, train stations, with thick stone walls, anti-aircraft towers built of reinforced concrete, standard weapons, struggled to dislodge defenders from these structures. Flamethrower Shermans were sometimes the only tool that achieved results, without massive American casualties. The case of the Leipzig Observatory, a circular stone observatory tower, housed a mixed force of Wehrmacht and Hitler Youth fighters. They refused to surrender for nearly 24 hours. A flame tank approached carefully, delivered 3 short bursts at the ground floor entrance, and that alone was enough to break resistance. 30 defenders exited with white cloths tied to rifle barrels, a U.S. infantry officer wrote, "If not for the flame tank, we would have lost 20 men clearing those stairs." Chapter 22: How German High Command responded to flame tanks. German field commanders documented hundreds of encounters with flame tanks. Several reports from the Siegfried Line and Rhine defenses include strikingly similar comments. Our men refused to stay in bunkers once flame tanks approached. Fear of fire was greater than fear of shells. In concrete positions, flame caused panic even if the crew was unharmed. Flame attacks led to immediate withdrawal. One German engineering officer summarized, Concrete stops bullets. It does not stop fear. This psychological defeat was arguably more important than the physical destruction. Chapter 23. The U.S. Army's final evaluation after the war, the U.S. Army conducted formal evaluations of flame tanks in Europe. Their findings were straightforward. 1. Flame tanks saved infantry lives. Against bunkers, factories, and basements, flame tanks reduced casualties dramatically. 2. Flame tanks were not tank killers, but did not need to be. Their purpose was to eliminate fortified strongpoints, not dual Panthers and Tigers. 3. Terrain was the limiting factor. In forests or heavy mud Hürtgen, Ardennes, maneuver was difficult. In towns and industrial zones, they were devastatingly effective. 4. Training was essential. Flame tanks required specialized crews who understood pressure systems, safety valves, and burst timing. 5. Psychological impact exceeded physical destruction. In over half of documented engagements, defenders surrendered before suffering casualties. The American conclusion: mechanized flame was the most effective method for reducing hardened resistance, without high infantry loss. Chapter 24. Why flame tanks disappeared after their success given their impact. One might expect flame tanks to continue evolving into the Cold War era, but the opposite happened. By the late 1950s, new anti-bunker weapons shaped charges. Recoilless rifles reduced the need for flame. Global politics discouraged the development of flame-based weapons. Tanks became more vulnerable to handheld rockets, making close-quarters flame missions to risky jet aircraft, and helicopters replaced ground flame vehicles for area denial. The U.S. Army retired its last mechanized flame systems in the early 1970s. Thus, the Sherman flame tank was a weapon uniquely shaped by the brutal tactical demands of World War I. Chapter 25. The legacy of a weapon built to end fortresses. The German army laughed at early Shermans. They mocked the tank's armor, its gun, its silhouette, its engine. But by 1944, laughter stopped. The flame Sherman earned a reputation in Europe not because of armor thickness or penetration, but because it accomplished the one mission no other weapon could reliably achieve: breaking the strongest fortifications Germany ever built while saving American lives. In the final analysis, it turned the tide at Aachen, forced breakthroughs at the Siegfried Line, cleared the ruins of the Ruhr, reduced resistance at Cologne, and Remagen prevented massive infantry casualties in urban combat. The Sherman flame tank did not win the war alone, but it shortened the war, and it saved thousands who might never have come home. The weapon that Germans once mocked became one of the most decisive and least recognized innovations of the entire European campaign.